Hello, my name is Anne Witheridge. I'm founder of London Fine Art Studios, an art school in South London. I'm here at Jackson's Art Studio to talk about my painting practice. I've always loved painting and drawing and have painted at school and in my holiday times. I really wanted to study art, but I was intimidated by the art schools, so I did history of art at university. After this, I slowly built up the courage and went to study art in Italy. When I was in Florence, we were studying at an Atelier, which is a small art school where the teachers work in the room with the students. And we were studying from plaster casts and from portrait models and figure models. It's very much part of the traditional practice where you're working always from life. After a couple of years, I also started painting a lot of landscape paintings when I was out there. And I really loved going into the Tuscan countryside and painting by myself. We were very fortunate to have lots of amazing artists working alongside us. So you're inspired both by the environment of being in Italy, by your peers and by your teachers. And it really all added up to a very intoxicating art education. It was thought very important that we shared our education, that you didn't just acquire the information and keep it to yourself, but that you went on and carried on teaching other students, because otherwise the dialogue of the Atelier tradition dies. So we were very much taught to bring it back to England, which is why we set up our own art school when we moved back to London. I started teaching at my own studios in London 20 years ago. With our students, we encourage them to work, first of all, with charcoal. So you're not having to worry about colour or temperature or oil paints or brushes. At the start, you might think it's quite simple, but every step is simple, but it's an accumulation of lots of drawing and painting steps that end up with the good result. So we say they're kind of coming with us for the grammar and to kind of learn the basics so that you can have much more freedom in the end when you go and work in your own studio. So it's a way of working together, of great camaraderie. We have lots of students who've been with us for more than 10 years, and they come one day a week, and they're really very good artists, and they don't need to be coming to the studios, but they come for the dialogue and to be together and paint together, and it's a really lovely atmosphere as well. I love doing lots of little sketches, not just with pencils and pastels, but also with oil paints. Definitely before I do a larger piece or a painting, I do a colour note sketch and a drawing sketch, a value study, to really help me kind of think about the design and why I'm drawing the image in front of me. When I'm painting, I love painting every subject matter. It doesn't really matter to me whether it's a figure, a portrait, a still life or a landscape, but it is always about working from life. I'm very much inspired by life. And when I'm looking at it, I always say that the irony is the more figurative you are as an artist, the more abstractly you're looking at the subject. So it's not really about, for me, it's not about a narrative or thinking about the end product. You're just looking at value patterns and colours and colour harmony, and you're really getting excited about the materials you're using and how you put them on the canvas, but you're not thinking about the subject matter or how am I going to capture that subject matter. You're thinking about how am I going to capture that beautiful sense of light in relationship to the dark. Very much just the subject matter is the paint and the medium. With most of my landscapes, I do them directly outside, and I do it in one day shot, or perhaps I go back and do a 2-day shot. I often take a photograph of what I'm looking at in nature because I think I haven't yet had time to finish it. And the moment I take it back to the studio, my painting has so much more information than the photograph does, because obviously you've taken very personal colour notes when you're painting in the landscape, and my photography skills are not good, and I've got a flat, boring image on my telephone of the landscape. And so I think I'm going to carry on working on it, and I hardly ever do carry on working it at the studio. I kind of feel that the fresh, immediate colour sketch is good enough, and the landscape that I've done outside is good enough. So I don't really work in the studio on my landscapes. When I'm in the studio, if I'm looking at a portrait model or a figure model, I like to turn up without a prepared canvas. So I've done the basic start, but I haven't yet put a colour note on it, because depending on what the model's doing or what still life is in front of me, I'll choose my colour wash accordingly. So I like to make that as a decision. I also spend a lot of time looking at the model and choosing where I'm going to stand before I make my start. I work generally with the students in a group, and I always let them choose the spot first. And I like to take the last easel in the room and try and make it, a good painting. So what appears to be the dud position, there isn't really a dud position ever, But I like to take the view that isn't thought of as the good view and then try and make a really good painting out of it. When you're in the studio, your model is quite close to you, so the sense of perspective isn't as deep. But I'm always saying to people, you're not painting the wall. We're not paint decorators. You're creating a space between the model and the wall. So you want to really have the atmosphere behind her, and you really want to create that sense of atmosphere. So try and make the relationship of the shadows in the figure much more important than what's happening on the edge of the figure. That should be kind of softer and looser, or the colour values should be closer together, and the important information is in the figure. I have a little dog called Broccoli, and she always sits where the model poses because she also understands that that's where all the focus is and all the attention is, and the energy is, she thinks, on her, but it's actually on the model. There are a range of different palette choices, both in terms of the weight of the palette, the material they're made with, and the colour of the palette. And every palette has a different reason for being the different colour or weight that it is. Choosing your palette to work on is, to me, as important as the surface on which you're painting, because it really informs how you paint. So you've got to work out whether you're somebody who likes to hold a palette or have it, on a flat surface next door to you. But this is a wooden palette, which I really like. And you can also get a glass palette. Here we are. The glass palette, this is just a clear bit of glass. It's quite durable glass. It's great because if you build up paint and it dries, you can use a little scraper and take all the paint off. They do also now sell grey glass as well, which is really beautiful to work on and has a really nice smooth surface. Often using a tearaway palette is really good. So this is the simplest one, which is white, and they have lots of the tear-off palettes. You can now get, have the holes so you can hold them as well. The great advantage of the tear-off palette is that you can just rip off the piece of paper and bin it at the end of the day. This is the kind of bog standard, easiest palette. It's quite small, so it makes it difficult to mix a big range of paints, but it's still got the nice smooth area here. So most palettes will have an area which is smoothed out here compared to this end, so you know which way to hold it. If I were to put it upside down, the smoothness is on the wrong side, so you know that's the incorrect way. And the reason why you want to hold your palette is because it's just an extension of your arm, but also to stop the glare. If you've got lots of glare on your canvas or on your palette, you can tilt it away from the light. Like artists wearing a beret. The beret, obviously it's a great look, but it also means that you can cut out the glare coming in from a window, or when you're outside, you can kind of direct it so your eyes are in shade. So this is quite a big one, which I like to use in the studio. And if I'm traveling about, then this is my smaller version of it. The reason why you want a big palette is because you want a nice surface area to mix your paint on. I also have this little Pochade box where the palette is inside. So it's restricted by the size because it's quite a small one. But if you're outside landscape painting, then your painting is only ever going to be, a little small sketch. So here I can stand up and hold it like that, just hold it outside. And I've got my nice little palette and my panel here. But I wouldn't advise working on something so small when you're in the studio. When I was in Italy, I had an old palette I'd found in our house, and it was like tiny little palette. And all the male teachers would come up and tell me that I needed a bigger palette. And I was like, all these male egos wanting their big palettes. And I hadn't realised that actually on a practical level, it makes a lot more sense because then you've got more space to mix your colours. Getting a large palette, you can get lightweight palettes anyway, even the large ones. It just gives you more mental space to mix your colours, and you've got more flow of paint. So for me personally, I don't like working on a white palette because I feel that you mix up your colours and you think you're mixing a really vibrant colour, but against the white, everything looks vibrant. So I think I prefer to work on a neutral colour like a grey or a brown. You're basically working on a mid-tone. So for me, the brown is great because it's a nice warm tone and I can really gauge my colours. The grey is equally good, and perhaps it sets you more into a dialogue of working with values, with lights and darks, because you haven't got colour at the start. So I'm going to discuss laying out your colours on your palette. This is a rectangular palette, and you'd put your colours from here, from the darks across to the lights. Because the colours are all quite far away, it doesn't get on your clothes, and you can also see it better when you're mixing the colours. So I would go from dark to light. I also often hook on some palette cups. You can keep a little bit of linseed oil and perhaps a little bit of medium as well on this end. There really isn't a strict method of what you should do, but you can definitely tell, how your painting is going by just looking at your palette. If your palette is in a complete mess, or if you've got lots of little dabs of paint, you're probably going to find lots of little dabs or mess on your canvas as well. So, be really conscious about your palette is a really important part of the process. So I'm really fussy about my toothpaste tubes, but I always squeeze from the bottom because this is, an expensive tube of paint. You want to look after it. And just squeeze it out. Like that. This is cadmium red light. Then you want to squeeze out a nice mound. And this is the yellow ochre and titanium white. Yeah, that's lovely consistency. So then if you wanted to use more colours, you can squeeze them out in between it. If I were landscape painting, I don't put black. I would put ultramarine blue on my landscape. So in the landscape, that the trees are green wherever they are. But also we have some scientific knowledge that the further away they are, the bluer they appear. You don't see it as blue because you haven't painted it as blue. But if you paint the distant trees blue or the mountains blue, suddenly will make sense to you in your eye. And people often paint a shadow just as a black. But actually, of course, the shadow still has a beautiful colour. And the shadow isn't just a value. It's also a dark colour of the fabric that it's on or where the model's standing. And that's really important to think about that as well. If I really limit my colours, then when you add an extra colour, it's incredibly beautiful and vibrant. Whereas if you always have access to all the colours, you don't remember how they work and you can't recall how you get this. So I think it's better to start off really limited, push these colours as much, and then it forces you to use drawing and value to create your colour or to create the image. And then when you add a little bit of colour, it really sings. The way you apply the paint is incredibly personal, and the way you mix the colours as well. But it's really important to experiment and decide which ways you like to apply the paint. If you're starting the painting, you'd probably start it with areas of colour like this. You don't want to go opaque from the start because it's very hard to go from opaque to transparent, whereas you can build from transparent and get more and more opaque. So as your base colour, we could start off with the black and a little bit of cadmium. Really spend a while and see what does the colour look like. Don't go straight away and don't presume that you've got it right. My darks will stay quite thin and quite loose, and the lights, so I go for a white is your base. And then you can, so here I'm just getting the feel of the brush, and then you can tint it with a bit of the ochre. You can really see it making a big difference straight away. Can you see it's a very different feel with the palette knife to with the brush, what it looks like. You see people deciding, I don't like that colour, and they go and dip it right in the middle of the paint, so all the paint gets dirty. You want to just scoop it from the edge. And then again here, you don't want to dump it in the middle. You want to just slowly tint it away and get it, darker like that. You see, so it's going from the light. Even here, I'm naturally going to be going from the light to the dark. So I'd never darken it on that side. That wouldn't be logical. I'd darken it on this side, and it will slowly start to marry that bit. With my paint, I generally start quite thin because I'm slowly just feeling my way around the canvas and working out, how it works. I don't want to commit at the very start with a big fat bit of paint. When I'm doing a small, short sketch, it's sometimes really good to create, the 4 mounds of colour that you think work together and put down the paint really thickly from the start and say, yeah, that works. If it works on your palette, it should work on your canvas. But when I'm doing a larger painting, I prefer to work in a thinner washes and slowly build up the dialogue. Also, I'm not so regimented with my methodology that by mistake, you'll suddenly find a lovely colour harmony that you hadn't considered, when you put one layer of paint on top of another. When you're painting, obviously, all of the painting process is really important. And there are definitely some artists who spend all their time looking and studying at the panel, and other artists who spend all their time playing on the canvas and also looking at the model. But it's really important to have it really nicely balanced. I would say I definitely spend most of my time looking at the model and really working out, how they're sitting, how the light works against them. But then secondly, mostly at the palette. And I spend a lot of time, if it's not right on the palette, don't think that it's going to be right by the time you put it on the canvas. Get it right here. I always think it's wiser not to blend your paint, to put the paint down directly. And if there's an area that looks as if it needs to be softened, You can soften it by using a soft brush, but I think it's better to really consciously think about what is the value that sits between those two colours and put it down, and that will create the illusion of it being blended, is probably more painterly effect. If my palette looks good, invariably my painting will look good. And I often take a photograph of my palette at the end of the day and I'm like, oh, such lovely colour harmonies. And yet the painting you're not so pleased with. But at least you've got a nice palette. So that's a really important part of it as well. So now I'm going to add colours into the mix. And I'm going to keep it logical, so keeping the colours within their range. So this is the Viridian next to the black. So this is ultramarine blue, which is a really great standard blue. You definitely need a cadmium yellow, or any kind of yellow like this, any strong lemon yellow, cadmium yellow light, just something which is, you see it's so much more punchy. And then I also have lots of earth tones. So this is cadmium orange, which isn't an earth tone, but it's just a really beautiful, vibrant colour. Moving towards the yellows. And this is raw sienna. So you've got a warm and cool of each colour, and it goes from dark to light really naturally. At the end of the day, when you clean off your paint, I know that Rembrandt used to kind of clean up the pile and make a big pile for the next day of the kind of the neutral greys that he'd created together. So you can really use all your old paints. I love cleaning off my paints and seeing what my average colour is. You know, if you're doing a landscape, it's going to be a soft green, or, you know, whether it's going to be a warm colour, and seeing, you know, what was my average colour when I mixed all the paints together is a really interesting part of it as well. I love using lots of different types of paints, and actually sometimes you get a batch of paint and it is hard to use because it's a little bit gritty. There are some people who like to use the same brand and it's got the same mixture and texture, and it really kind of facilitates the painting practice. But I like using lots of different paint brands, and then you've got to really kind of fight them. I like that dialogue with the paints. So obviously on a practical level, it's better to kind of get accustomed to one paint brand, but it's much more fun to try out different brands. I really love the whole creative process, and I do a lot of etchings and I do a little bit of sculpture as well. I think all these different mediums really help inform the other mediums. Like, I'm not an artist who just works with this one medium. I love trying out and experimenting with lots of different mediums. With sculpture, I'm trying to get into glazes and trying different colours on sculptures as well, which is really fun. It's really all about working from life and seeing the model being inspired by that, whatever medium you're working with. But I would definitely encourage you to experiment with different mediums as well as the oil painting and drawing. So people often ask if I have any secrets to my art or kind of hidden ideas, but I'm very open and I like to share, you know, my painting method and my dialogue. And I don't think it's at all unwise to do that. I think you want to share what you love. And if we're all natural and we follow our own dialogues, we're going to paint differently anyway, because a painting is a reflection of you, and we're all very different people. I think it's very sad to keep it behind closed doors, because actually art is a very wonderful thing that we all want to share in and have a dialogue about. And, you know, artists are generally very sociable people. There's a myth that artists kind of stay alone and are, you know, grumpy characters in their studio, but actually we love sharing and discussing our methodologies and what we're doing and how we're painting. Van Gogh obviously is a very famous character, but he was, you know, desperate for the approval of Gauguin, and he wasn't very good with people, but he wanted to be with people. Turner is also a character who people have often thought of as a loner, but he apparently was an amazing teacher at the Royal Academy schools, and the students really loved his teaching, and he was very strict with them, but also very giving teacher. So the main thing is to find your own voice. Don't impose a dialogue. So you can look at art history and kind of find inspiration, but of course your life and what you've done has informed so much. So you can't be the artist. You can't pretend to be a different artist to the one that you are. So, you know, I paint quite small and I paint quite directly because, you know, I have quite a busy life and I've got children and I'm teaching, so that's become my dialogue in art. I think it's really important to, if you want to start painting or drawing, is to remember that you're not starting. You've been drawing all your life and you've been looking at art. And I always say to to people that the talent for art is what brings you to the studio and makes you want to draw, because obviously your eyes are already trained if you enjoy art, and it's about getting your hand-eye coordination together. So that's really important, and not to be intimidated by it, because, no artist sat there and was doing amazing drawings at the start. We've all gone through, a really difficult process. And I think really remember to keep it about the joy of painting. I think if you like looking at the visual world, which I like, looking at people on the tube or, in the streets of London or anywhere is exciting, because you start looking very differently. You look at colour and you look at shapes. You're not looking at the subject.